In this video, we're going to continue taking a look at Activity 134 CAD modeling skills in the IED curriculum. So if you're following along in the curriculum on the Inkling page for Activity 134, we're going to be starting at number 19. And here it says we're going to use a shell feature to hollow out the base part. So I'm going to go ahead and spin the model around to see the bottom. The shell feature can be found under the Modify panel. And what we end up having is we can select the faces or the body. So I'm going to go ahead and select the bottom of the part. They say in the activity to utilize a thickness that is typically uniform for a lot of plastic injection molded parts, which is this screwdriver base would be made from plastic injection molding processes. So 1.2 to about 3 millimeters thick. That would end up being the thinnest. This would be in inches. Would be about 0.05, so let's do about 0.1. And here you can actually, before you commit, it'll show you a preview of what that looks like. So if you notice, it's going to keep a uniform inside thickness of 0.1 inches or 1/10 of an inch as we go along and shell out the rest of the part. So this is very useful to represent a lot of components like this. Can reduce weight, can also reduce printing time when you go to 3D print different parts. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and that will shell out the bottom. Now as we move through the activity, number 20 says is just as soon as you create the shell feature, they want you to delete it. So the one thing is we're going to be adding some other features that we will want to make sure that this will not interfere with the shell. Typically a shell would be one of the last things you want to do when you're looking at doing a part. So this also shows you how to go back down here to the model history tree. You'll see the last thing you did was the shell. So you can right click on it and say delete, and then you get your full solid model coming back. Alright, so here for number 21, we're going to take a look at adding a short tapered extrusion to the bottom of the solid. Now the good thing is I'm going to go ahead and flip this to the bottom as well. I'm going to just press extrude. I'm going to choose the bottom, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag this down. We don't want a very large extrusion taper, but here maybe we can go through and kind of see what size that we want. So here you can kind of see maybe about about 1/8 of an inch, 0.125 would be good enough. And they want us to put a taper on the outside for it to flare out on the bottom. So here on the taper angle, we can go ahead. I think they are wanting us to use a 3-degree taper, so then that way you can kind of see it's going to kind of flare out on the bottom. It's not going to be exactly flat on the edges, and we'll be able to see that kind of happen. So that it's going to be very subtle, but it's going to be there. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're going to say OK, and that'll add that little short extrusion taper for the base. As we go along, step 22, we're going to model the center hole in the top. One of the notes on the activity is we don't want to use the whole command. Typically, I try to use the whole command anytime I'm creating holes, but because of the taper that can be put on this, they say to recommend utilizing creating a circle. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new sketch. I'm going to select the top face. I'm going to choose a center point diameter circle, choose right on the origin, and I'm going to make this, since some of the dimensions I've used, 1/2 inch. So what I can do here is, this is fully constrained, so I don't have any blue lines being represented. And I can go ahead and I can extrude, choose the circle. I'm going to drag down into the part. They say that the hole extends almost to the bottom edge of the hexagonal form, so I'm going to turn this over to the side view. And just to kind of match, you'll see we're getting close to a -2. So I'm just going to go ahead and say -2 in this case. Again, we're just working with some arbitrary numbers, and none have been given to us. And they recommend a 2-degree taper to taper in, so that would actually be a -2-degree taper. And you can kind of see how it, definitely looking from the side, you can see how that tapers inward. So that way when you stick the drill bit down in there, it's not loose, it actually kind of friction fits around that drill bit shank. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And that will model our central hole in for our part. All right, so here they talk about numbers 23 and 24, discussing with a partner, and without measuring the part, kind of justifying the depth of the hole and revising the model. So that can be something the students take a look at. But number 25, we're going to use the pattern tool to model the smaller holes that are around the top circular feature. So we're going to go ahead and create a new sketch. I'm going to choose the top face again. What may be beneficial is I'm going to choose center diameter circle, and I'm going to make it a construction circle. Choose the origin and kind of set where would my centers of these circles be at. Looking at my measurements, I'm going to probably say 1.5, and then that'll go through and show kind of like a little bit of a construction circle. I'm going to choose center diameter again, and then a center diameter circle again, and I'm going to untoggle the construction. And then where that this lines up right here at the top, you'll see an X. So right along this line. So it's really as a guide to where the centers for these new holes are going to be. I'm going to go ahead and say this is about 1/4 of an inch, and the only thing is this circle is going to be blue. I'm going to throw a horizontal vertical geometric constraint to the origin, and then that'll fully constrain that particular one, because I can still drag that along, and once I lock it into place, I can't move it now because it has to stay vertically centered with the origin. I'm going to go ahead and say finish sketch. In this case, we're going to extrude very similar like we did. I'll choose the hole. They go through, and they say that these holes are not as far down into the part. So I'm going to go ahead and just say that let's go ahead and make this a -1.5. So we did -2 on the last one for the center hole. We'll just do a -1.5 to make it nice and easy. And then they want to talk about, do we want to taper the holes? Maybe we throw another small -2 degree taper on those just to kind of make them match. All right, from here, now that I have one hole, I could have done all 5 holes at one time. We're going to have a total of 5 holes, but I'm going to show you utilizing the create, and under pattern, we're going to use circular pattern. So we've done circular pattern. One thing you may want to look at is by default, usually it says pattern type by faces. You may have to hit this drop down. Now, anytime we add different parts by utilizing a 3D feature, we want to choose a feature. A body would be the entire thing here, or a component would be the entire screwdriver base. We don't want to pattern those. We just want to pattern some features. So I'm going to choose that. I can go over here to my model. I can choose my hole. I could also go down here in the model history tree and choose it. And then I can say select for the axis. This one's pretty easy. I could select the principal axis of the blue line right here. I could also choose the outside of the circle. And then that will go through and pattern around on that axis. So here, I'm going to need to adjust the quantity to 5. And then as far as what we deal with is they have adjust, identical, things like that. We're going to leave that on adjust. And we're going to leave the suppression options to be available. And we're just going to say OK. And that's going to pattern our 5 holes around that center axis. And you'll see now that's where we're kind of seeing as we go along. All right, so this is where now that says to shell the part again. So here's kind of the reason why we took away the shell from the beginning. So I'm going to use shell. Again, choose the bottom. Point 1 is it looks the same until now we see where the holes, now it's providing a shell around there. So if we would have shelled this before and tried to create these holes, we would have had open holes that we would have been able to see right through the bottom of the part. So whereas this, it's going to shell around the holes and provide a thickness for those. So that way there's some material around them. Again, one of the last things we want to do a lot of times is to shell when we're adding some of those features. So when you're planning out how to model your parts. All right, I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And then from here, as we move down to number 27, they want us to emboss your name on the top cylinder surface of the base part. And here's kind of what we're going to end up doing is we're going to create a new sketch, selecting that top face. We can use the text tool, which is under the create panel. And I'm going to zoom in here so that way I can do that. When I go to create my text, I can actually click to where I want this text to start, and then my text, I can actually inside of the text box, I can type my name. So I'll put my name in there. The height of the text, we'll go through and leave it. I think I'm going to go and round this off to 0.4 just to see. There it is. So, and then here we can actually rotate it. So it looks like I need to rotate about 180 degrees. And that can be done. I can bold, I can italicize, underline, I can change the font. Typically Arial is a really good font, especially when you go to 3D print things. There's going to be some things where there's some really, here it doesn't really show the different types, but you know, you get into some of those cursive writing fonts, it gets hard for the program to be able to maintain that. And then also looking at, you know, being able to 3D print those as well. So it looks like 0.4 is going to be a little bit too high. Let me try typical drafting standard, 0.12, 0.125. Let's do a 1/4 of an inch. And then the little handle right here is where I can drag and kind of place that there. So I must place it right there in between around these holes. And I'm going to go ahead and bold the text, because usually bolding it also helps with when you go to 3D print or anything like that. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to finish the sketch. And then what we end up doing here is we can always taking a look at doing a extrusion and just extruding to a height as we kind of need. So here I can always select, I'm going to zoom in here, select my text. There we go. And I can always drag, I can always pull on this little handle, or I can always type in a distance. So here I think this looks pretty good. Again, we're doing a join, creating new material. We're saying OK, and there's my name there embossed or you know, created on the text. All right, as we take a look through the rest, we only got a couple more steps. So that's really one of the things that we can do is you know, also use text tools to put some different information on there. So we can also utilize some 28. We want to investigate some tools to help us measure the model. So 29, they want us to measure our model to gather dimensions to maybe give somebody else some you know, ideas about the geometry and the top part of the case. So here, the first option, they say they want the top edge diameter or radius of the tapered circular extrusion on the base part. So what you can do is here under the inspect panel, you've got some different options to do that. And what we're going to do is we're going to use measure. And measure allows us to go through and have a few different changes. So here we can set a precision of you know, how big we want this to be. And then here I can like choose like this outside circle. So this goes through and it gives me some information. This diameter is 2.132, so the 1 is referring to what my selections are, and this is all the information on it. So based upon what I did. So if I click on this bottom section, so here you'll see it'll go through and provide number 2, selection 2, that length of that arc, what is the radius that's set, and everything as such. So they also provide some different other dimensions at times, you know, based upon what are selections that you have. So that's really kind of what we're dealing with. So here the selection filter, you know, allows you to go through and do that. So if I hit close, that allows you to do so as well. So here on measure, we're able just to go through and get some measurements on some parts. So utilizing some of the inspection tools. So like here I could end up clicking on these 2 points. Here I got 0.125. You know, that's just utilizing some of those. But that's kind of how to utilize the measure tool in order to go ahead and get some of that information. And that really will finish out our activity for 134 CAD modeling skills. And we'll be utilizing a lot of these CAD modeling skills throughout the curriculum and throughout the year.